I want to begin this letter by saying that I have no hate, animosity, or bitterness in my heart towards anyone that I have wrote about in this letter. But because I am at the point in my life where my future depends on my honesty, and that the honesty being spreaded amongst the people who love me and deserve to hear my story, it is very necessary that I tell my story. The way, the why, the who, the when, the how. This letter is to my sisters, Lisa and Cassandra, who are on my father's side. My sister Teresa, who is on my mother's side. My two brothers, Bruce and Kerry, who are on my mother's side. And of my other family members, this letter is also to my kids, Joanne, Jay, and Robert Jr. Now, the reason I felt that it was necessary to write this letter is because I do not feel too good within my body, which constantly reminds me of how horrible things would be if anything were to happen to me, God forbid. And if I left behind all of the rumors, lies, and accusations that has been spread globally about me, and because I have been so isolated and not given the opportunity to tell my side, which is the true side of my story. I felt compelled to tell it the best way that I could. And because I don't spell, it enabled me to write this letter physically. So I had to wait until I found someone within the prison that I could build enough relationship with to trust them enough to write as I talk about something as personal and sensitive as this story is. Now, I would have written this letter to my fans also because they are my family as well, especially after holding me down with the love, support, and relentlessness and unwavering faith that they have in God and me. But I did not know whether or not if it was okay or even legal to write such a letter to the public. These few lines of this letter that my heart, my soul, my mind, my music, and everything about me appreciated them, and to my fiance, my friend, my wife, my soulmate, my angel, and my queen, Joy, whom God has blessed me with and has come into my life and has given me all the new reasons to fight, not only for myself or for my kids or for my freedom, but for more importantly, Joy has given me the reason to fight for what God wants me to become and not what man wants. And I truly thank God for her. For 2.5 years, I've been sitting in prison trying to figure out how to get my truth out to you guys. But because I was so afraid that I might get put in the SHU, which is isolation, it would silence me and 100 times more for speaking out. I became muffled by my fears. You know, the government is very intimidating, especially when it comes to people like me, because of my voice is very big, and the government is very intimidated by because they know that my voice holds my truth, and the truth is the very thing that could set me free, which is why the government basically kidnapped me. And the reason why I use the word kidnap is because I was arrested and thrown into not only prison, but in the worst place you can be within the prison, which is called the SHU. And I was held there for 71 days being robbed of my due process, then robbed of my constitutional rights, which were all violated, as you guys know. Robbed of my liberty. Where they put me in the SHU, I was told I was never once for a second in that place felt protected. And I later found out SHU is where they put you when you do something wrong. And the SHU, it stinks really bad. There's no windows, no fresh air, no food after 5 p.m. You only get one phone call a month, which is only for 15 minutes. No barber for haircuts, no TV. You have to be handcuffed and taken to the shower. You have to be handcuffed while being taken down to medical. You have to be handcuffed to meet with your attorneys. And I also have to sit there and meet with my attorneys while being handcuffed and feet shackled, which gave me an instant sense of defeat. I also felt like my attorneys also had the look of defeat on their faces when they saw me in chains. I remember Steve Greenberg telling me that I was going to have to be in jail for at least 2 years. And when he told me that, I felt like my heart had completely stopped. And when I asked him why, he just looked at me and said, because that's how long it's going to take for him to go over the discovery. Now, this was in the very, very beginning. He hadn't even went for a bond yet. But I was so green, I know nothing about how the federal court system process worked. And the way he said it to me and how he looked at me when he said it, it felt like he was going to say I had to be there for just 2 days. It was like no big deal. And I know then that I was in for a long, dark ride and I didn't know what to do about it because I was just stuck and my mind was gone. And I was just trying to pull myself together because I knew if I had fallen apart, then there would be nothing for you guys, Joy, my family, and fans to fight for. So I put all of my energy I had, which was not much at the time, towards just trying to hold me together. After a week of me being in the SHU, I started to experience some very weird things going on in my head. But they were not suicidal thoughts, but nightmares of me being buried alive and I never woke up, screaming of anything like that because I never went to sleep. I would just doze off and immediately be awakened by those thoughts. Then they tried to put a white boy that was from a gang in my cell with me, but all of the other inmates, which were black, started yelling and beating on their cell doors, screaming out to me, saying to not accept that white boy because he worked for the police. I didn't know what to do, but I was so emotional and so confused. I knew I decided to be myself at the time, and out of nowhere, I just started complaining to the officer that I wanted to be by myself and didn't want that guy coming into my cell. And so the officers left the guy, but an hour later, they came back to my cell, handcuffed me and took me into the suicide room. It was 100 times worse than the cell I was in already because the inmate that was in the suicide room right before me had wiped the walls in that cell with his own feces. And although the officers cleaned it before they put me in there, the smell was still in that cell. The bed was on the floor with a big haunting light right over it. And every morning that light would flick on at 6:30 in the morning, then flick off at 10:30 p.m. every night. At some point, Epstein had killed himself. That's when they put me back in the original cell and made me take another cellmate, which was another gang member who was put in the SHU for fighting and was in jail for gun violence. And then at some point, they took him out and made me take the white boy that I told, and then they made me take the white boy I talked about earlier. I was told that if I didn't take him, the officer said that the judge was going to hear about it and it wouldn't be good for my case. And so I took him. Long story short, the white boy ends up getting into it with a bunch of black gang members, and that's when I heard him yell out from the cell that he had made a knife, and that's why he's in the SHU. A day later, the guy steals my radio after I marked it by putting my initials on it, and I come back from the legal visit, and he switched my new radio with his old radio, and at some point I reported it because that's what I was told to do. But when I told the lieutenant, he just told me to go back to the cell and tell the inmate to keep his hands off my property. But I explained to the lieutenant that I thought I was doing the right thing by reporting it, and that if I go back in the cell not knowing who this guy is or what his case is about or what kind of time he's facing, there's no telling what I might do to him just because I'm afraid of what he might try and do to me. But I felt like he wanted something to happen between me and him. But of course I can't prove that. The officers would come and get me for a shower. They would back me out of the cell door and handcuff me. And I'm handcuffed. The officer would start talking and laughing with me about certain songs that I wrote. and the officers would ask me to sing some of the songs, and I would do it. But I thought I could get some extra food from them because I have seen other inmates get extra food for cleaning up or folding clothes, but I didn't get any extra food. But they would continue to ask me to sing there, here and there, hoping that at some point they would give me some extra food because, oh my God, I stay hungry all the time. And even though I would sing and laugh and smirk with the officers as I did, behind the smile and the laughter was a tsunami of tears because while I was singing, I felt degraded and worthless because I would be in handcuffs while doing it. But I was also hungry, so the more they would ask me, the more I would do it. Humiliating as it is, but like I say, I was hungry. So I never wanted to say no because that could have been the day that they decided to give me some extra food. But it never happened. I could never understand by me being non-violent why they put me in a cell in the SHU with an inmate who's in a gang or an inmate that was in my cell who was there for fighting or any violent crime, I guess, when I'm supposed to be in the same cell with under protective custody. Why wasn't I put in a cell that had someone with a similar case to mine? Why was I in a cell with someone who's being punished for something they did wrong? How can the SHU be a place for people that do bad? And when they do bad, the government puts them in the cell with someone who has not done bad. And it's supposed to be in that same cell under protective custody for protective custody. How is that protection? Because all I can remember while being in the SHU is anxiety attack after anxiety attack and nightmare after nightmare and being hungry every night for 71 days. That I was in the SHU made me even more psychologically and mentally devastated simply because I was not used to being in that kind of environment ever in my life. And for the last 30 years, I was used to living a very wealthy and lavish lifestyle. And to be walking my dog while smoking a cigar on a beautiful summer day. And then the next thing I know, you in handcuffs, shackled at the ankles and put in SHU, which is basically a bathroom, for 71 days. I know for a fact it did something to my brain, but I'm not a doctor, and therefore I cannot diagnose myself. And the worst thing about the whole situation is that I did absolutely nothing to deserve it. Not only that, 71 days in the SHU anyway, after I ended up with another cellmate while I was in the SHU, and he started telling me about the place called Population after I started expressing myself for the first time while being locked up in the SHU. And when I asked him what exactly is Population, he started explaining to me that in Population they had TVs. You could make phone calls every day, all day. You could email all day. They had barbers to cut your hair. They had plenty of windows everywhere. You could actually see people, traffic in the city, and you could go to the rooftop where there was outside basketball and soccer. He also told me that you never had to be handcuffed when you meet your attorneys or go to medical or when you take a shower, or you could take a shower anytime you want to. Then he started telling me about commissary, which I have never heard of, that they had that before. He said commissary is where you could order food like mackerel, crackers, rice, coffee, and creamer and sugar. You could order sausage, noodles, MP3 players to listen to your music, and you could eat whenever you wanted to throughout the whole day. And I'm not going to lie. I had been in this SHU all that time without these things, and it felt like he was describing heaven to me. And when I talked to my attorney, I was so upset. I explained the difference between Population and what he told me the prison had called protective custody, because I had been telling him for weeks, how I needed food, fresh air, and all the other things that I found out they had in Population. But it had just seemed no one wanted me out of SHU. And it felt like to me that the MCC didn't want me in Population because I would be able to communicate on the phones, computers, and more legal visits. And I believe Steve Greenberg didn't want me out of the SHU because he wanted me to be isolated so that I couldn't have no control or the resources to confine in other legal advice. But I couldn't take it anymore because I felt like I was going to die in the SHU. So I demanded that he make sure I come out of the SHU and get into Population. And even though Steve, along with some of the lieutenants there took a while to make it happen. After 71 horrible and inhumane, agonizing, humiliating, and most of all, traumatizing days and nights spent in SHU, I was finally brought to population. Once I was brought into population, I could breathe a little better because there was TVs, windows, phones, food, and everything. Just like an inmate told me in the SHU. But nevertheless, I was still having nightmares and anxiety attacks, except on a full stomach now, because it didn't change the fact that I was still robbed of my liberty and was in prison. Anyway, there were so many things going wrong while I was in population as well. Officers would just wake up, walk up to my cell door while I would be locked in it, and they would ask me to sing. And yes, I would do it at that time. I would never tell them no because you don't want to be on the wrong side of the officers at all. I learned real quick while being in prison, after being in the SHU after 71 days, not being able to eat after 5 p.m. Soon as I got to population, I started eating everything in sight, no matter what it was, because I had literally been deprived of my freedom to eat whatever I want, when I want, for that 71 days. My body was craving food, sweets, coffee with creamer and sugar, chips, peanut butter, and anything else I had. And because of that kind of eating behavior, I eventually started feeling weird, like dizzy sometimes, or my eyes would get really tight sometimes, and I would feel like I was going to pass out. Now, all of this is happening, and at the same time, COVID had broken out. It was in the MCC jail, and inmates were getting infected left and right. And that's when they held back my medical records and didn't tell me that I was a point away from having diabetes, and I was at high risk. And the government held my medical records back because my attorneys were going for a bond at the time, and the government didn't want my attorneys, nor the judge to know about the diabetes because I could have gotten bailed out of compassionate release because of COVID-19. So while my attorneys were in court arguing the bond, that's when I found out about the diabetes and me being at high risk. The reason I know that the government held the information back is because the medical gave me the information, and the same day my attorneys were already in court arguing the bond. And when they gave me the medical records, it said the date of when the results came back, and the date was stamped and being a month prior to when they had just given it to me, which means it took a whole freaking month for a medical, which was 4 floors down from me, to let me know about my test results, allowing me to continue to eat sweets and all kind of bad foods, not working out or anything, just so they could store my medical information so that my attorneys couldn't add the fact that I was a high risk and 1 point away from being a diabetic, which could have helped the judge decision and me getting a bond. But the time I got the information to my attorneys, it was too late. The judge had already denied me bond, but I told my attorneys to put it in for another one right away because COVID was spreading through the jail like a wildfire. So they did file another motion, and the judge denied me bond again because she said that I did not actually have diabetes and I was just a point away from having it. So the doctor told me he put in the computer for me to get special meals from now on. And that's for people that are pre-diabetic. And as time would go by, I went back to medical again. The doctor would notice right away that I had gotten bigger in my weight. And I would let him know that I have yet to receive the healthy food that he prescribed, and he would put it in the computer again. And whenever I would go back to the doctor, which was every other month, he would go through the same thing. And that is me telling the doctor that I still haven't received the healthy food. Now, I even told him at one point that I had seen other inmates getting it. Nevertheless, I've been locked up for 2.5 years and still have not received a healthy meal. And I'm 100% sure that my medical records are in the BOP system and they should know everything about my health. And nothing is being done. Bottom line is, because I never received the healthy meals and because they held my medical information back from me for a whole month, which I could have started to eat better, I could have at least tried to do some kind of exercise. I ended up being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. We here now.
wish I was pushing the act. Damn, I wish I was pushing the act. Damn, I wish I was pushing the act. I had no haps if I was pushing the act. Damn. I wish I was pushing the